Good evening and welcome. My name is Diane Rowan. I'm very delighted to welcome you to this board-in service on compassion and the Golden Rule. We have about an hour together. Hope that you'll find this helpful and interesting. I don't know about you, but when I first thought of the Golden Rule, one of the things that came to mind was something that I saw way back in my childhood. And you might remember the Wizard of Oz cartoon. You've got the king saying, "Remember the Golden Rule." When he spoke to his subjects, their response was to say, "Well, what is the Golden Rule?" And he described it by saying, "Whoever has the gold makes the rules." I was surprised when Pope Francis visited the United States. He also talked about the Golden Rule, and one of the responses from the cartoonists there, when he was addressing the members of Congress, was to remember the Golden Rule, and the same refrain came out, "Whoever has the gold makes the rules." I'd like to think that in our time together, you'll learn a little bit more about the Golden Rule than those particular extracts. But it's amazing what pictures will say to you. I don't know about you, but I'm a big fan of Pope Francis. You can see some of these messages that you can make into slogans, and one of them was to make the Golden Rule great again. So, when he spoke to Congress, it just happened to be on Thursday the 24th of September. I'll come back to that date in just a second, but you can see in the US Congress and in his speech. This is some of the things he said about the Golden Rule then. He said you should remember the Golden Rule, to treat others with the same passion and compassion that we want to be treated. We should seek out the same possibilities for ourselves and for others. Let's help others to grow as we would like to be helped ourselves. Then he summed it up, he said, well, basically, if we want security, we should give people security. If we want life, we should give life. If we want opportunities, then we have to provide opportunities. The last thing he said was that the yardstick we use for others will be the yardstick which time will use for us. So, enough of me. If I said to you a word association, when you hear the word mercy, what do you think of? When I've asked that question, there's been a variety of responses. Some people have thought of Shakespeare. People like Lisa, our Director of Catholic Education. She taught English for such a long time, Shakespeare always comes to mind. And this quote from the Merchant of Venice, that the quality of mercy is not strained, it droppeth as gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesses him that gives and him that takes. A wonderful reflection. You might not have thought of Abraham Lincoln, but I'm also a big fan of his. And I love some of his homespun wisdom. He said, I've always found that mercy bears richer fruits than strict justice. Mercy rather than justice. So, another favourite you might have thought of too, Nelson Mandela. Hasn't his life been just such an example to everyone? He said you would achieve more in this world through acts of mercy than you would through acts of retribution. And I think he's transformed the whole of South Africa with that message. Well, one of the things when I mention the word mercy, often people think of Catherine Macaulay and the Sisters of Mercy. Very appropriate. Mercy Health and Aged Care in central Queensland and around the world also make a significant contribution. In our schools, we're very fortunate to have one of our colleges named Mercy College in Mackay. Some people have thought of the works of mercy. When I was in school so many years ago, I can remember learning about the works of mercy, and they talked about the corporal works of mercy, so things that you did with your body, your hands. You fed people who were hungry, you gave them drink, you gave them clothing, you sheltered them, things that you can see and touch. But there are also spiritual works of mercy, to counsel those who are doubtful, to instruct the ignorant, so that teaching is a work of mercy. And so on. That's a reference that we still teach in our schools, in our catechism and in our classes. So that's one other connection with the word mercy. And of course, back to Pope Francis, because he's talked about the church being a place of mercy, a place of hope, where everyone would be welcomed, loved, and forgiven. I love Pope Francis because he takes not just the words, but he puts them into action. You would remember when he visited the migrants, not only did he go to visit them to try to offer them consolation and hope and to bring their plight to everyone's attention, but he took some home with him. Imagine arriving back at the Vatican and saying, well, I've just found these people, I'm sure we've got plenty of room here, and they'll be very welcome. So 12 of them that he brought back with him. So he puts his words into action. It was Pope Francis who decided that we were going to have an extraordinary Jubilee year of mercy. Extraordinary because usually a Jubilee year is every 50 years. But he decided he couldn't possibly wait 50 years for a Jubilee. He decided, beginning on the 8th of December last year and continuing until the 20th of November this year, we would be celebrating the Year of Mercy. A Jubilee year, a time to rejoice and to put into practice. You might not know that the motto or theme chosen for that, it's taken from Luke's Gospel. So, chapter 6 of Luke's Gospel, verse 36. It comes at a section that many people would remember as the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus was teaching his people. He talks about loving your enemies, doing good to those, lending without expecting to get anything back. And then he said, be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Luke chapter 6. When I was reflecting and preparing for this particular workshop, I was at a seminar with a singer called Marty Haugen, and he said the true test of a year of mercy is not going to be how many times you've read the Bible. It's not going to be how many prayers you've said. It's not even going to be how many songs you have sung. It's about have you become merciful, just as God is merciful. So, in our Bible, you would be aware that the older books written several thousand years ago were written in Hebrew, most of them. The newer books, like the books written about Jesus, written by Paul, were written in Greek. And what we have are English translations of those two languages. So, the Greek words for that particular quote, be merciful, the word merciful in that is the second of these Greek words, oktirmos. And the other two words are used often in the scriptures. It talks about, in English, you could say mercy or pity or compassion. And that's why I decided I would talk about compassion, not just about mercy, because sometimes I find people feel that's just a church word. It doesn't have much to do with their lives. So I thought, well, compassion seems to be something that might be a bit easier. And one of the women who inspired me to do this was a woman called Karen Armstrong. She's an English woman in her 70s. You can see she's been made an Order of the British Empire. She's also a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature. So, a scholar, a student, a writer, a lecturer. Karen has written many, many books. You don't have to worry about reading the whole list, but as you scan your eyes down, can you sort of get a sense of some of the topics she covered? The very first one talked about her joining the convent after she finished school. Then you can see that she wrote about the first Christian, St. Paul. Throughout there you've got references to the gospel, to Christianity, the Crusades, and Muhammad, an interesting collection. She's continued to write almost a book a year, an astonishing woman. She talks a lot about God and Jerusalem, the Bible, Islam. She talks about Buddha, and then the challenge for people of faith after September 11. You can see she's continued writing about the Bible and about God. But one of her books in 2010 was this one, and it was called 12 Steps to a Compassionate Life. I don't know about you, but I kind of like a book that gives you clear direction. You can say, okay, start at the beginning. It was an easy book to read. Much harder, I found, to put it into practice. If you do decide you want to read anything of Karen Armstrong's, I would strongly recommend her book on St. Paul. Really simple, very inspiring, a wonderful, wonderful tribute to St. Paul and the questions people have had about St. Paul over all these years. So, would you believe that in 2007, Karen Armstrong was awarded the TED Prize? Now, you're probably familiar with TED Talks, you would have seen them. So, prizes for technology or entertainment or design. So I'd like to share with you a little bit of her talk from this TED Prize. She was awarded $100,000, not for her, but because she had a mission in life of what she wanted to do. And so she decided that this would be how she would use the money with the help of TED. So if you can wait for a second, I should be able to play that clip for you.
For years, I've been feeling frustrated because as a religious historian, I've become acutely aware of the centrality of compassion in all the major world faiths. Every single one of them has evolved their own version of what's been called the Golden Rule. Sometimes it comes in a positive version. Always treat all others as you'd like to be treated yourself. And equally important is the negative version. Don't do to others what you would not like them to do to you. Look into your own heart, discover what it is that gives you pain, and then refuse under any circumstance whatsoever to inflict that pain on anybody else. And people have emphasized the importance of compassion, not just because it sounds good, but because it works. People have found that when they have implemented the Golden Rule, as Confucius said, all day and every day, not just a question of doing your good deed for the day and then returning to a life of greed and egotism, but to do it all day and every day, you dethrone yourself from the center of your world, put another there, and you transcend yourself. And it brings you into the presence of what's been called God, Nirvana, Brahman, Tao, something that goes beyond what we know in our ego-bound existence. But you know, you'd never know it a lot of the time that this was so central to the religious life. Because with a few wonderful exceptions, very often when religious people come together, religious leaders come together, they're arguing about abstruse doctrines or uttering counsel of hatred or inveighing against homosexuality or something of that sort. Often people don't really want to be compassionate. I sometimes see when I'm speaking to a congregation of religious people a sort of mutinous expression crossing their faces because people often want to be right instead. And that, of course, defeats the object of the exercise. Now, why was I so grateful to TED? Because they took me very gently from my bookline study and brought me into the 21st century, enabling me to speak to a much, much wider audience than I could have ever conceived, because I feel an urgency about this. If we don't manage to implement the Golden Rule globally, so that we treat all peoples, wherever and whoever they may be, as though they were as important as ourselves, I doubt that we'll have a viable world to hand on to the next generation. The task of our time, one of the great tasks of our time, is to build a global society, as I said, where people can live together in peace. And the religions that should be making a major contribution are instead seen as part of the problem. And of course, it's not just religious people who believe in the Golden Rule. This is the source of all morality, this imaginative act of empathy, putting yourself in the place of another. And so we have a choice, it seems to me. We can either go on bringing out or emphasizing the dogmatic and intolerant aspects of our faith, or we can go back to the rabbis, Rabbi Hillel, the older contemporary of Jesus, who, when asked by a pagan to sum up the whole of Jewish teaching while he stood on one leg, said, "That which is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. That is the Torah, and everything else is only commentary." And the rabbis and the early fathers of the church who said that any interpretation of Scripture that bred hatred and disdain was illegitimate. We need to revive that spirit. And it's not just going to happen because a spirit of love wafts us down. We have to make this happen, and we can do it with the modern communications that TED has introduced. Already, I've been tremendously heartened at the response of all our partners. In Singapore, we have a group going to use the Charter to heal divisions recently that have sprung up in Singaporean society, and some members of the parliament want to implement it politically. In Malaysia, there's going to be an art exhibition in which leading artists are going to be taking young people, and showing them that compassion also lies at the root of all art. Throughout Europe, the Muslim communities are holding events and discussions discussing the centrality of compassion in Islam and in all faiths. But it can't stop there. It can't stop with the launch. Religious teaching, this is where we've gone so wrong, concentrating solely on believing abstruse doctrines. Religious teaching must be always lead to action. And I intend to work on this till my dying day. And I want to continue with our partners to do two things: educate and stimulate compassionate thinking. Education, because we've so dropped out of compassion. People often think it simply means feeling sorry for somebody. But of course, you don't understand compassion if you're just going to think about it. You also have to do it. I want them to get the media involved, because the media are crucial in helping to dissolve some of the stereotypical views we have of other people, which are dividing us from one another. Same applies to educators. I'd like youth to get a sense of the dynamism, the dynamic and challenge of a compassionate lifestyle, and also see that it demands acute intelligence, not just a gooey feeling. I'd like to call upon scholars to explore the compassionate theme in their own and in other people's traditions, and perhaps above all, to encourage a sensitivity about uncompassionate speaking, so that because people have this charter, whatever their beliefs or lack of them, they feel empowered to challenge uncompassionate speech, disdainful remarks from their religious leaders, their political leaders, from the captains of industry. Because we can change the world. We have the ability. I would never have thought of putting the charter online. I was still stuck in the old world of a whole bunch of boffins sitting together in a room and issuing yet another arcane statement. And TED introduced me to a whole new way of thinking and presenting ideas, because that's what is so wonderful about TED. In this room, all this expertise, if we joined it all together, we can change the world. And of course, the problems sometimes seem insuperable. But I'd just like to finish at the end with a reference to a British author, an Oxford author, whom I don't quote very often, C.S. Lewis. But he wrote one thing that stuck in my mind ever since I read it when I was a schoolgirl. It's in his book, The Four Loves. He said that he distinguished between erotic love, when two people gaze spellbound into each other's eyes. And then he compared that to friendship. when two people stand side by side, as it were, shoulder to shoulder, with their eyes fixed on a common goal. We don't have to fall in love with each other, but we can become friends. And I am convinced, I felt it very strongly during our deliberations at Vevey, that when people of all different persuasions come together, working side by side for a common goal, differences meld away, and we learn amity, and we learn to live together and to get to know one another. Thank you very much.
So, as I said, an amazing, amazing woman. And her story, she referred there to say that the Golden Rule, she talks about it's been written over so many thousands of centuries. The oldest version of it from Confucius. I didn't know that. I'd always attributed it to Jesus and given him the credit. I loved when she talked about Rabbi Hillel, and when she said that the rabbi, when he was asked why would someone convert to become Jewish, and he said, "Can you teach me the whole of the Torah while standing on one leg?" And the rabbi, of course, was up to the challenge. He could stood on one leg and say, "Well, what is hateful to you, do not do to another." And that is the whole of the Torah. The rest is just commentary. I'm very grateful to the Columban Mission Institute. They've produced a poster. You can get a small version of the poster this size. You can get a large wall-size version of the poster by contacting them. And they've demonstrated in this poster how the Golden Rule has been interpreted by so many world religions. So it's not just about Christians or Jewish or even Confucius and those who follow his teachings. It's a teaching about compassion that spreads across the whole of the world. There might be an expression of the Golden Rule that you like best, and you might decide that's how you like it expressed. You might want to have a chat about that to say why you like that one best. Some people say they like the positive version. Some people say, well, I remember what I shouldn't be doing. I remember coming across this particular storybook. This appeals to young children. And they were saying, in this particular book by the Berenstain Bears, and Mama Bear had on her wall of her house the Golden Rule as an embroidery. I'm lucky enough that I got a really clever mother. And my mother, when I shared the story with her, she decided, well, anything they can do, I can do too. So she's produced for me my own copy of the Golden Rule, all beautifully done. And it says, from Matthew's Gospel, because you'll find it both in Luke and in Matthew, where he says, "In everything do to others as you would have them do to you. This is the law and the prophets." So, Matthew chapter 7, verse 12, the Golden Rule. In this particular story of the Berenstain Bears, little Sissy is given a locket, and instead of when she opens up the locket, she thinks it's going to be just, a photo or a memento thing. It actually has the words of the Golden Rule given to her, and she learns from reflecting on that what difference it makes to her life. So, it's a really simple book. You might find it's of some interest to your children. When I thought of children, I love this particular quote. It sort of says, when you start thinking of other people, you have to behave differently. It doesn't seem to matter whether you're big, bad and ugly. When a 2-year-old hands you a toy phone, you have to answer it for their sake, don't you? It doesn't matter how silly you might look, but you do it for their sake. So that's part of the Golden Rule, isn't it? Thinking of what other people, how they would feel. So, there is this other second book by Eileen Cooper. It would probably suit an older audience of students, and one of the good things I found about it is that when they're talking about the Golden Rule, they also pay tribute to other religions in it. So, a boy and his grandfather on a city sidewalk, obviously set in the States, they saw on a billboard the sign, the message of the Golden Rule. The boy asked, what does it say? And his grandfather explained it to him as the Golden Rule. He said it's so valuable, it's a way of living your life that's so simple, it shines. Isn't that a lovely way of describing a golden rule? And his grandfather explained other ways of expressing it. It's a good rule. And the boy talks about who is it for. It's a rule for everyone, everywhere. And then you can see they talk about different religions, just as we've got on the poster there from the Columban Mission Institute. So, again, there might be one occasion you can think of when someone treated you in the spirit of the Golden Rule. Can you think when it was? Can you think who was involved? What was it like? How did you feel? Because that's one of the things we would be encouraging in our schools and colleges, to think of the other person, to treat them as you would like to be treated yourself. I've always been just so impressed by people that welcome you, make you feel at home. They know what it's like to be a stranger, and they know what it's like to be lost and afraid. There was a beautiful story told by one of our schools of one of the students who comes from another country, very poor, did not have much, felt out of it, didn't feel like he belonged. But the one thing that he loved was sport. He couldn't do the language very well, but he loved playing what we would call soccer, what he called football. He played at lunchtime and had a fabulous time, but he didn't have the right shoes to play it. His classmates heard him, saw him, watched him, and saw what this meant to him. One of his classmates went home, talked to his mum and his dad, and they decided, as a whole class, that they put together a collection so they could buy him a pair of shoes so he could play football and be part of the school and part of the team. I was just so touched when I heard that. How someone knew what it was like, treated them like that, and then behaved differently, and the difference it made to them and to this young boy. Way back to Shakespeare's quote, isn't it? Mercy blesses those that give as well as those that receive. So, I hadn't seen this particular quote before. I thought the golden rule, yes. They talk about the iron rule. This is what you should do to others before they do it to you. Or there's the silver rule, do to others as they do to you. So if someone is bad to you, you can be bad to them. If someone is rude to you, you can be rude back. The golden rule, of course, is different. It talks about you do to others as you would have them do to you. But they added a titanium rule that you would do to others as Jesus has done to you. I thought, now that's a challenge. It's not really something I would find very easy to do at all. But perhaps we will build up to it and move from iron to silver to gold and to be titanium followers. Now, Karen Armstrong talked about the Charter for Compassion. I said that when she won her TED Prize and she was awarded the $100,000, she convened a group of people in Switzerland. They were people from 6 faith traditions: Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Confucianism. They came together in Switzerland and they drafted a document known as the Charter for Compassion. I can give you a copy of that if you would like to see it. I'll make sure that it's emailed to your school or college. It's a 1-page summary. If you like it, you might decide that it's worth framing and saying, well, the Charter for Compassion is worth remembering as well. It's a wonderful, wonderful tribute to all of these different faith traditions. So, if I could then share with you now just another version of the Charter for Compassion. You can see it written, but I always find it's actually easier when you hear it. So, this is the website for the Charter for Compassion. And on that same website, so it's been developed with the help of TED, this is how they share the words of the Charter for Compassion.
The principle of compassion lies at the heart of all religious, ethical, and spiritual traditions,
calling us always to treat all others as we wish to be treated ourselves.
Compassion impels us to work tirelessly to alleviate the suffering of our fellow creatures.
To dethrone ourselves from the center of our world and put another there.
To honor the inviolable sanctity of every single human being.
Treating everybody without exception.
With absolute justice, equity, and respect.
It is also necessary in both public and private life.
To refrain consistently and empathically from inflicting pain.
To act or speak violently out of spite, chauvinism, or self-interest.
To impoverish, exploit, or deny basic rights to anybody.
And to incite hatred by denigrating others, even our enemies.
Is a denial of our common humanity.
We acknowledge that we have failed to live compassionately.
And that some have even increased the sum of human misery in the name of religion.
We therefore call upon all men and women
to restore compassion
to the center of morality and religion.
To return to the ancient principle
that any interpretation of Scripture
that breeds violence,
hatred, or disdain
is illegitimate.
To ensure that youth are given accurate and respectful information
about other traditions, religions, and cultures.
To encourage a positive appreciation
of cultural and religious diversity.
To cultivate
an informed empathy
with the suffering of all human beings,
even those
regarded as enemies.
We urgently need to make compassion a clear, luminous, and dynamic force in our polarized world.
Rooted in a principled determination to transcend selfishness.
Compassion can break down political, dogmatic, ideological, and religious boundaries.
Born of our deep interdependence, compassion is essential for human relationships and to a fulfilled humanity.
It is the path to enlightenment and indispensable in the creation of a just economy and a peaceful global community.
Okay. It's a fairly, how would you say, deep statement. So sometimes it takes a bit of time to take in everything that you hear in the Charter for Compassion. That's why I find sometimes a written version of it is very helpful. You might like to have a read of it and have a think of the words that stood out for you. I know that when I first heard it, there was a sentence there, to dethrone myself from the centre of the world, and I thought, that was a challenge, because so much of our life we're told it's all about you. Forget about everyone else, it's only about you. To take yourself from the centre and to put someone else there, it's a real challenge. So, the other thing in the Charter for Compassion, there's another sentence. It talks about making sure that our students are given accurate information about religions. So much of what you hear about religion in the press and in the media is not accurate. Some of the criticisms that you hear say religion's responsible for all the war in the world, which is not true, of course. But she and the people who wrote the Charter maintain that we have to give accurate information. I remember seeing this particular illustration about some people think that in the Bible there is a God that is just waiting to punish you. If you could imagine this image of God in heaven sitting at his computer, you can see this poor unsuspecting person walking along, obviously has been a bad person, and God has decided that this person should be punished by a piano falling on him. If you had enough sight, it's probably a bit difficult to see, but the key on his keyboard is got the big capitals, the word smite. And so many people, this is the God they believe in, a God that is looking after you, looking at you and wanting to punish you. That's not the God I believe in. It's not the God that I think we should be teaching in our schools either. So it's important that we teach accurate information. What is in the text? Why is it written like that? What does it mean? A real challenge for us, I think, in our schools and colleges. So, Karen in her book said these 12 steps. She thought we should learn more about compassion, and I'm hoping this has been an opportunity to learn a little bit more about compassion and the Golden Rule. She said it's about thinking and acting differently, just like Pope Francis did. He has different thoughts, he puts them into action. Because Karen writes about our primitive brains and say when we were ancient people, what we had to focus on basically was being fed, fighting off those that wanted to feed on us, and if we couldn't fight, then we had to flee. And that's so much of what you see in the world today. So many people, the focus is just on their own food, their own needs, their own property, fighting for what they have, and if they can't get that, then they flee. So, when we try to say, is that what life is all about? If you tried to Google it, what would you get for your answer? The meaning of life. For Karen, when she was writing about religions, she wrote about Buddha. You remember seeing some of her books on the list. Buddha, who lived 400-500 years before Jesus, and he saw around him in his life, he'd led a very sheltered life in his palace and in his kingdom. But he saw the greed, the lust, the envy, the hatred everywhere in the world. And he decided to combat that. He would be a fierce ascetic, giving up food, drink, alcohol, pleasure, all those sorts of things. But it didn't make him happy. He nearly starved to death. He nearly died, but it still didn't give him a sense of meaning and purpose. But when he thought about emotions like compassion and joy and gratitude and kindness, he felt differently. He felt as if he could live for others. He relaxed and meditated. This is why we practice meditation even to this day, because of the feelings it invokes in us. And he said, if you arrive at that state of calmness and peace with yourself and with others, this is what they call nirvana. But you don't stay there. Your job then is to go and to teach other people. Don't stay just focused on yourself, but think of others. So, her book goes on, as I said, with 12 more steps. Simple as they seem. Start with your own world. Be compassionate for yourself. Because I think in our world today, there's so many demands on ourselves. We need to be compassionate for ourselves. The gift of empathy, think of the others. Mindfulness, the ability to be actually present here and now. Not to be distracted by all the other things, but to be present to people and places and things. To eat our food and say, this tastes beautiful. Thank you for making this. This is so good. And so on. How do we speak? How do we express our concern? And then the last thing she would say, if you have practiced all of these for your life, then perhaps truly you could say you love your enemies. Just as Nelson Mandela did after 27 years, was it, in prison, that he could come out and love those who had been responsible for his treatment. So, gives us a bit to aspire to, I believe. A more contemporary writer than Buddha is a gentleman called Hugh van Cuylenburg. I was grateful to one of the principals in Bundaberg, Mark Fox, who highlighted for me the Resilience Project. Hugh had spent time in India, and he also learned from the students that he taught there. You can Google him, you can find his website for the Resilience Project. I wanted to share this short interview that's conducted on the TV, just to give you a bit of an insight as to why the Resilience Project and what he learned helps us and our students. So, one more clip.
Jane, well, it's a startling statistic. 1 in 4 adolescents in Australia have a mental illness, and 65% of them never seek help. Well, now there's a push to keep our children mentally healthy with one program. It's called the Resilience Project, and it's leading the way.
For more, founding director Hugh van Cuylenburg joins us now. Hugh, thanks for joining us today. We're really fascinated by this. So, from your experience, why are children under so much pressure and stress mentally?
Yeah, look, one of the statistics that I read the other day is that the adolescent brain in the year 2016 receives the same amount of information in a week that our brains used to receive an entire year, you know, when we were going through adolescence. So
presumably through smartphones and...
Yeah, well, that's it. You know, you can take any snapshot of our day, you know, when we were going through adolescence, and you then compare it to, you know, what's happening now. And, you know, when we were going home from school, you know, we would walk to the tram stop or we would walk to the bus, and we were just kind of by ourselves. And you know, we're okay with that. But we see kids now walking home from schools and, you know, they've got a device in their hand like it's an extension of their body pretty much. And so the trauma on the brain is quite significant, and that's why we're seeing things like anxiety disorder being, you know, so high.
And does that differ between boys and girls? What's your observation on that front?
Well, the statistics say that they do. 1 in 3 adolescent girls in Australia now have an anxiety disorder. And I think we look at the boys' statistics, we have 1 in 5. So there's a difference there, but there's other things, you know, it goes both ways. We do a lot of work in schools teaching emotional literacy, and what we see, and emotional literacy basically is the ability to label the emotion you're experiencing as you're experiencing it. Really, really important skill. But we find that boys find that a little bit harder. So when we're in schools, we're trying to teach boys about how they can label their emotions, identify it, and then work with it.
So tell us about this project of yours, and what are the 3 important principles?
Yeah, so we teach, this is at schools all over Australia, we're teaching kids how to practice gratitude, empathy, and mindfulness. Gratitude's a huge one, and I mean, a lot of Australians live by a model of happiness called the if and then model of happiness. So we say to ourselves, if I get the latest iPad, then I'm going to feel happy. If I buy these clothes, then I'll feel happy. If I buy this car, then I'll feel happy, which is a really dangerous model to live by. Gratitude's about looking at what you've already got and not worrying about what you don't have. And then we teach empathy, which is basically thinking about other people before you think about yourselves. And the neuroscience behind that is it's really strong. Whenever we do something for someone else, our brain releases oxytocin, which makes us feel happy. And mindfulness is the greatest gift you can give a young person. It is the ability to feel calm and to shut off disruptive thoughts so you can be present.
Oh, Hugh, I mean, this just makes so much sense. And I'm listening to this thinking, my children are in the thick of this, aged 9 and 10. And surely I've got to lead by example, haven't I? We as parents have to get off these devices as well, and we have to go out and do something to give them the experience of showing empathy and gratitude. And
yeah, absolutely, yeah. And look, the advice we give parents, we do a lot of parenting talks around Australia. And one of the main things we say, when we're practicing gratitude is we ask parents to get their kids to write down 3 things every single night that went well for them. And when you do that, what you're doing is you're actually rewiring your brain to start scanning the world for the positive. We're asking parents to download a program called Smiling Mind, which is a mindfulness app, which is free. You can get it from the iTunes store, from the App Store, and you've got to get your kids doing meditation, whether it's 5 minutes or 7 minutes or 10 minutes a day. It is the greatest way. And when I talk about the amount of pressure on the brain at the moment, I'm not necessarily, I'm not really saying get off devices. I'm just saying make sure we protect our brain at the other end, which is by
give your brains a break.
Yeah.
Give your kids' brains a break. It's really important.
Absolutely.
Because there's a lot of hormones going through there too. We're not just talking about the stuff that's coming in from the outside. But internally, they're going through chemically a huge change.
That's it. And when we're teaching empathy, we're asking the kids to, do an act of kindness a week, whether it's random, whether it's planned. Really important that we're doing things for other people. We get in the habit of actually practicing, being empathetic.
I love this.
Can I just say, this to me just makes so much sense. We'll make sure we have all the details on our website. Thank you for all that you're doing, because you've made this your vocation, and full respect for what you're doing. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys. Thank you.
The Resilient Project is obviously something for parents and teachers all around the country. Please head to theresilienceproject.com.au. The details are just there on the screen.
And as I said, you'll find a lot more information about Hugh and his project on their website. So, nearly finished. If I could finish with, as I started, the reference for the theme of the Year of Mercy from Luke's Gospel, to be merciful. And I was lucky enough to hear Marty Haugen teach us about it, but also sing about it. So, a song by him to put the words into practice.
Be merciful, be merciful, just as God is merciful to you. Answer evil with good, answer hatred with love. Be merciful as God is merciful. As a tender Father, God is merciful. As a loving Mother, God is merciful. Slow to anger and full of compassion. Be merciful, just as God is merciful to you. Show compassion to the lost and forgotten. Give comfort to the sick and the dying. Do to others as you would have them do to you. Be merciful, just as God is merciful to you. Answer evil with good, answer hatred with love. Be merciful as God is merciful. And as Jesus taught us, love your enemies. Do good to the ones who hate you. Do to others as you would have them do to you. Be merciful, just as God is merciful to you. Answer evil with good, answer hatred with love. Be merciful as God is merciful. Offer blessings to the ones who curse you, and pray for the ones who abuse you. Do to others as you would have them do to you. Be merciful, just as God is merciful to you. Answer evil with good, answer hatred with love. Be merciful as God is merciful. Be merciful as God is merciful.
So, our song, the refrain, very, very powerful, isn't it? It takes the words of the Golden Rule and challenges us to be merciful, to be compassionate, as Karen Armstrong said. If you wanted a much more up-tempo song, you could check out another video called Being Kind, and it talks about the difference people have made in others' lives by being kind. So, I think I've done my work. It's your turn to do some work. From all you've seen, you've heard, you've thought about, you've talked about, what will you do in this year of mercy? I wish you all of the best. I thank you very much for your time. I hope this has been helpful. Thank you.